Hi, I'm Alaris, and this is the night my family turned Christmas into a battlefield dressed in tinsel. I walked through that door thinking I was just the quiet one, the peacekeeper. I didn't know they'd rip my dignity off my head before dessert. I didn't know one small hairpin could expose everything we'd been pretending to love. The smell of roasted pine nuts and cinnamon hit me before I even crossed the threshold. Inside, the house glowed with gold, chandeliers gleaming, laughter spilling from every corner. It was supposed to feel like home, but I had stopped belonging here long before the lights came on. I carried a small wrapped box under one arm, my hair pinned back with the royal gemstone hairpin I'd saved for years to buy. I thought it looked elegant, thought maybe tonight no one would find a reason to notice me for the wrong thing. The noise dimmed when I stepped in. My sister, Velora, turned first, tall, glittering in red sequins, holding a glass of champagne like it was an extension of her hand. Her smile froze for half a second before warming into performance. "Ollie, you made it. I wasn't sure you'd drive all the way from West Haven. Traffic must be terrible for you." Her words felt sweet until the last note, then sharp, precise. I smiled back. "Merry Christmas, Velora." Dad nodded from his armchair. "You're late. We already started dinner." "Mom," Evadne waved me over. "Set your gift by the fireplace, dear. Oh, and don't forget to wipe your boots." The rug's new. I did as told. The rug was white, spotless, expensive, the kind meant for people who never actually walked on it. When I straightened, I could feel Velora's eyes sweep over me. Her gaze stopped at my hair. "Still wearing that thing," she said. Her tone was syrup, thick and heavy. Before I could react, she reached forward and unclipped the hairpin from my hair. It happened so fast my breath caught. She held it up, turning it toward the chandelier light. "Look, Mom, the famous Taobao treasure. You really should tell people it's vintage. They might believe you." The laughter came like glass shattering, bright, cruel, echoing. It bounced off the walls, found every soft part of me. I froze. The spot where she pulled stung, not just the skin, but the space underneath. "It's not Taobao," I said quietly. No one heard me or pretended not to. Mom extended her hand, and Velora placed the hairpin in it like evidence. Evadne turned it under the light, sighed, then set it beside her plate. "Next year, maybe don't wear this to dinner, sweetheart. People might think we don't teach our daughters about taste." The room shifted back into noise, cutlery clinking, glasses clinking, the sound of a world that had already moved on. I stared at my untouched wine, the deep red trembling in the crystal. I wanted to disappear into it. I looked at Dad, hoping for something, anything, but he was busy cutting his roast. No one noticed the silence I carried like a bruise. Zella, Velora's little girl, bound it up with sticky fingers. She grabbed the hairpin off the plate before anyone could stop her. "Mom said this looks fake. Is this the China one?" More laughter, softer this time, indulgent, approval disguised as amusement. "Zella," I said, kneeling slightly, "please hand it back." She blinked, confused but obedient, and placed it in my palm. I pinned it back into my hair, forcing a smile. The clasp snapped shut louder than it needed to, sharp, deliberate. I caught my reflection in the silver serving tray. The pin glimmered weakly against my dark hair. Maybe if I act like it doesn't hurt, it won't. Dinner blurred, after that. Conversations about real estate, travel, achievements, all things that belong to other people. When laughter broke out again, I didn't ask why. I just smiled at the right times, nodded when needed. I could feel the humiliation cooling into something heavier, sediment settling in a glass that no one would ever drink from again. Velora leaned back, crossing her legs. Ollie, remember when you tried to cut your own bangs? Mom nearly fainted. I managed a small laugh. Yeah, I remember. She tilted her head. You've always had such brave taste. Brave meant foolish. I knew it. Everyone did. Mom clucked her tongue, standing to refill glasses. Be nice, girls. It's Christmas. Velora smirked. I am being nice. Aren't I? Zella giggled. Mommy's always nice. That laughter again. I wanted to rip the sound out of the air. When no one was looking, I slipped away to the kitchen. The air was cooler there, quieter. I gripped the marble counter, staring out the window. Snow was falling, soft and perfect, covering the world outside in mercy. My reflection stared back at me, pale, strange, someone I didn't quite recognize. Don't sulk. Ollie. Velora's voice drifted in from the hall. It was just a joke. You know how we tease. A joke. Always a joke. I swallowed hard. My knuckles whitened around the edge of the counter. They don't tell jokes. They test boundaries. I turned off the kitchen light, watching the snow reflect the house's golden glow. I wondered how long a person could keep smiling before their face forgot how to stop. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. I didn't drop the fork. I dropped my dignity, and no one noticed the sound. That's where it all started. The laughter from dinner still echoed through the walls long after the plates were cleared. I could hear the faint hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the sound of a family celebrating itself. My scalp still throbbed where Velora had yanked my hairpin. I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. When I walked back into the living room, the gift exchange had begun. Wrapping paper littered the floor. The smell of pine mixed with candle wax and perfume. Mom sat by the fireplace, holding a book wrapped in gold foil. She tore the paper slowly, savoring the moment like she was unwrapping praise. Oh, how beautiful, she said, holding up a leather-bound journal. The cover shimmered under the lights, embossed with wildflowers. I froze. That design, the tiny daisy in the corner, the faint brush strokes, it was mine. There was a tag tied with red ribbon. From Velora. Everyone clapped. Dad said, Now that's thoughtful. Velora smiled modestly. I wanted something personal for her. You know how much Mom loves journaling. My hand tightened around my glass. The wine trembled inside it. I had made that cover 2 months ago, thinking of Mom's birthday. I'd shown it to Velora, proud of the craftsmanship. She called it cute. I didn't realize she meant available. I didn't speak, not because I agreed, but because I'd learned words only fed their laughter. My silence was easier to digest. Mom brushed her fingers over the painted flowers. It's perfect, sweetheart. You always remember what matters. Velora's eyes flicked toward me, daring me to ruin the moment. I didn't. That's where the applause began, and the pieces of me started falling quieter. Dad stood next to the fireplace, pointing to a new, framed portrait above the mantel. Look at that. The photographer outdid himself this year. The family gathered, smiling at the image that defined us. Perfect lighting, perfect smiles. I stepped closer, and then I saw it. I wasn't there. Or rather, I almost was. The corner where I should have been had been cropped. My shoulder, the one nearest Velora, erased for balance. "Oh, it looks so clean," Mom said. "Much better composition." Velora nodded. "Yeah, it was too crowded before." Crowded, like I was clutter in their frame. I looked at the picture again. Mom's pearls, Dad's steady hands, Velora's perfect posture, Zella grinning in her holiday dress, and the empty space where my laughter used to fit. I swallowed, the air thick and sweet with smoke and pine. No one noticed I'd stopped breathing. Zella was the next to squeal. "Is it my turn?" she shouted, tearing open a pink box. The satin ballet costume spilled into her lap, soft and glowing under the tree lights. "Oh my gosh," she gasped. "Mommy, you remembered. It's just what I wanted." Velora laughed, brushing Zella's hair aside. "Of course, sweetie. I always do." The room filled with soft laughter, indulgent smiles. I felt my chest tighten. I had spent 2 weekends sewing that costume. After Zella's last recital, when she cried because she didn't fit the store sizes, Velora had said she'd never have time to order one. I told her I'd handle it. I didn't know I'd meant for her to take the credit, too. No one corrected Zella. No one even looked at me. They don't need to steal, I thought. They just wait for me to give and take the bow. The sound of wrapping paper being torn felt like the ripping of skin. I walked toward the stairs, gift box still clutched in my hand. My fingers left dents on the cardboard. In the hallway, the noise dulled. I could hear only the echo of their joy, bouncing against the walls that refused to remember me. Velora's voice floated from the living room. "I'm thinking of starting a little gift shop next year. Handmade things, thoughtful touches. I've got such an eye for details." The box crumpled in my hand before I realized I was squeezing it. Of course she did. She'd stolen my hands long ago. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. For a moment, I thought I heard my grandmother's voice, the one that used to tell me, "Don't let kindness turn you invisible." But I had. I'd let them polish me down until I disappeared. Someone laughed again, a man's voice, maybe a guest, saying, "Velora's so creative. She's just like her mother." And then Mom, "She really is. Alaris was never into this kind of thing. Too practical. Too practical." The words landed like ash. I wanted to step out and scream the truth. Instead, I took a breath and stood still. The lights from the tree flickered across the hallway mirror. My reflection looked faint, washed out between reds and golds. The ribbon was mine. I thought. The thought was mine. The silence theirs. Looking back now, I realized that was the first moment I stopped asking to be seen. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The noise from the living room rose again. Cheers, clinking glasses, the metallic hum of celebration. I was still standing by the stairwell, the crushed box in my hand, when Mom's voice rang through the hall. "Everyone, quiet down a moment. Let's have a toast." I walked back in, slow and careful, like someone entering a stage she didn't belong to. The lights were brighter now, reflecting off the silverware, the wine, the smug glow of people who had already decided the ending of this night. Mom lifted her glass. "We're so proud of our Velora," she said, her voice carrying that effortless authority that always silenced the room. Velora stood next to her, modest smile, eyes wet with rehearsed humility. She's our pride and joy, our example. The applause started immediately, echoing off the high ceiling. A few neighbors joined in. Mom had invited them. Of course. She worked so hard, Mom continued. She never asked for anything, never expected help from anyone. Built everything herself. My stomach turned. I looked down at the carpet pattern until it blurred. The glass in my hand was empty, but I still held it tightly. In my phone, deep inside an encrypted folder, sat the scanned document, 3 years of quiet donations. The scholarship fund I had helped establish. I could see the line at the bottom. Donor alias, my initials. Velora's tuition was not a miracle of merit. It was a secret of mercy. And mercy, I was learning, was the fastest way to erase yourself. Velora cleared her throat, pretending to be shy. "Oh, Mom," she said, "it wasn't that big of a deal. I just worked hard. That's all." Someone from the crowd said, "You deserve it, sweetheart. Some people have it easy. You've earned every bit." I wanted to laugh. Easy, the word pulsed behind my teeth. Easy to take credit. Easy to smile through theft. Easy to forget who paid the price. When the room quieted again, Mom raised her glass higher. To Velora, she said, "Proof that grace and ambition can coexist." The laughter returned, warm and approving. It wasn't a celebration. It was a coronation. A child ran forward, Zella, of course, pulling on Mom's scarf. "Grandma, your scarf is falling." Mom chuckled. "Oh dear, does anyone have a pin?" Before I could move, Velora reached for the side table where my hairpin rested, my one piece of something beautiful, the one I'd reclaimed hours ago. "This'll do," she said, clipping it into Mom's scarf, as if it were a cheap paperclip. The room burst into applause again. "How creative," someone said. Cameras flashed. Laughter. Compliments. My heart stuttered. The gem caught the light, glinting like a wound. I didn't move. Couldn't. Watching her handle that pin was like watching someone use your voice to tell a lie. Mom turned to Velora, smiling proudly. "That's what I love about you, darling. You always find a solution." Velora laughed, brushing imaginary dust from her dress. "What can I say? I'm resourceful." The word resourceful hit me harder than any insult. It meant she could make beauty out of anything, especially things that didn't belong to her. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a slow step backward. The applause still roared, but all I could hear was the blood rushing behind my ears. My throat burned. I needed air, but none of it in that room belonged to me. I turned toward the hallway again, every muscle tight, my hands shaking from holding still too long. The sound of Velora's laughter followed me like perfume, sweet, choking, inescapable. By the time I reached the doorway, the room was already posing for photos. Mom's scarf pinned perfectly, Velora's hand on her shoulder, the guests smiling like they were witnessing something pure. Not one of them noticed me leave. I stopped in the kitchen doorway, eyes on the tiled floor. It wasn't just about a hairpin anymore. It wasn't about the book or the dress or the photograph. It was about the years of small erasures that had turned into a masterpiece of absence. They didn't call it stealing when you never claimed it. But I felt the cut. Looking back now, that was the moment I realized silence wasn't peace. It was consent. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. By the time I woke, the house had quieted into something resembling peace, more like the silence after a storm, when the air still smells like damage. The morning light bled in through thin curtains, the same ones I remembered from childhood, though everything else had changed. The scent of coffee lingered faintly, but no one was around to offer a cup. I walked into the kitchen, my socks brushing the cold tile floor. The coffee pot was half full, lukewarm. I poured it anyway. The cup warmed my fingers, but it didn't reach anything deeper. Outside the window, Dad was already in the backyard, raking the snow from the deck in his robe. It was something he'd always done, busy hands when he didn't want to talk. I stood by the back door for a moment, unsure if I should disturb the illusion of routine. Then he looked up and waved me over. I stepped outside. The cold bit into my skin, even through the sweater I had grabbed off the couch. "Morning," he said, not looking at me. The rake scraped in long, dry swipes. "Morning." He paused, resting both hands on the rake like a pastor leaning on a pulpit. "Your sister, she's under a lot of pressure. You know, always people watching. Expectations. It's not easy what she does." I nodded slowly, the mug steady in my hand. "You, though," he said, finally glancing at me, "you've always been the steady one, the one we could count on to not make waves." Something twisted in my chest. My throat tightened. "Being steady," I said, "isn't the same as being seen." He didn't answer, just reached out and patted my shoulder once. "Sometimes keeping the peace is more important than proving a point," he said. I swallowed hard and looked down at the snow. Looking back now, I should have said something more. But I was still trying to earn value by being quiet. We went back inside. I sat with my coffee, listening to the house wake up. Dishes clinked. Someone laughed upstairs. "Ollie, sweetheart." Mom's voice rang out. "Could you run to the car and grab the second cake tray?" Of course. I didn't answer, just slipped on my boots and walked out to the driveway. My breath fogged the glass as I opened the trunk. The tray slid toward me, teetering, but I caught it just before it fell. My hands shook for a moment from cold or anger. I couldn't tell. I carried everything so nothing dropped, but I was still the one nobody saw holding it. When I returned, the brunch crowd had started to arrive. More hugs, more chatter. I placed the tray on the kitchen island, nodded to Mom, and tried to disappear into the wallpaper. I nearly made it until someone called out, "Is that Elaine?" Velora's college friend, Amanda, stood by the fireplace, smiling brightly. "Oh my gosh, I forgot you were the sister. Quiet one, right?" "Alaris," I said gently. She snapped her fingers. "Right. Sorry, I always forget your name." She turned away before I finished breathing. Mom laughed lightly. She's always been the quiet one. The room didn't laugh, but it didn't object either. I stood there, the tray of cake beside me, feeling the weight of everything unspoken. I wasn't forgotten. I was misfiled and expected to thank them for remembering it all. Looking back now, I realized that every silence I allowed became a story they rewrote without me. I stood by the patio door, watching the family cluster like birds around a banquet, voices overlapping into comfortable stories. My mug steamed in my hands. The heat grounded me, kept my fingers from trembling too visibly. Evadne was in the center, animated and pleased, telling the same little anecdote she used at every gathering. Of course the oak house will be hers, she said, smiling like a judge passing sentence in a small courtroom. The words felt casual, polite, soft, but they landed like stones in a pond that used to be mine. Looking back now, I should have felt fury at once, but instead I felt the slow, patient tightening of something that had been held too long. That afternoon stretched on, like a rehearsal for a departure I did not yet understand. Thurston pulled Valora aside with that mixture of pride and theatrical pride that men like him practice. "You've always loved that Thunderbird," he told her quietly, as if sharing a secret and a legacy at once. Valora's smile widened, calm, grateful, the exact expression that collected praise and turned it into a family heirloom. I heard the exchange from the hallway. Words slipped through the half-open door like smoke. My knuckles whitened around my phone when I thought about the car's key sitting in the garage where my father would hand it to her as though it had always belonged to her. I realized that even nostalgia had favorites and memories could be edited to flatter the edited person. That moment stayed with me, small and hot, like a coal I refused to spit out. Later, Zella barreled down the stairs, all hems and giggles, and knocked over a box of scarves near the tree. A silk ribbon slithered across the floor and stopped at my shoe. The bent hairpin caught my "I like a ruined" star. It lay there, the metal scuffed, the setting slightly askew, an echo of the evening's earlier theft. I stooped, picking it up as if rescuing a tiny relic from a shipwreck, and walked toward Evadne with the deliberate calm of someone carrying an accusation folded into a napkin. "May I have this back?" I asked, my voice steady but soft enough to be polite. Evadne shrugged, the trained, airy dismissal of a woman who had never had to justify a habit of taking. She said, "That old thing? Let her play. It's nothing now," and the room, like a body, breathed approval. When I said, "Then let her play with something else. This one's mine," the quiet in the room changed its tune. For half a second, my father's face shifted, micro-expression caught in a glance like a photograph barely taken. Valora blinked, surprised the joke had been interrupted, and then laughed, the kind of laugh that folds blame into a bow and hands it back. Some guests shifted in their seats, uncertain which script to follow, while others returned their attention to their plates as if nothing unusual had happened. I turned away before they could muster a response. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of an argument they could mislabel as drama. Looking back now, I understand that my refusal to be erased that day was the first purposeful thing I had done in years. I left the room with the hairpin clutched like a legal brief. Valora found me later in the kitchen, trying to dry a glass without thinking, and she tried to play it light. "You're sensitive this year." "Huh?" she said, half joke, half calibration of tone to find the correct notch of contempt. The way she said it, casual, practiced, made me feel as if I were being measured and found inconvenient. I met her calm with something I had rehearsed in silence. Precision, not passion. "You've taken everything without ever asking," I said, inventorying losses in a sentence. "I'm just making sure this time. You hear me say no." Her expression flickered between annoyance and amusement. She clearly expected me to fold back into silence. That evening I felt something inside me stop asking permission to exist. She laughed then, a small, surprised sound meant to belittle and dismiss, and I did not flinch. I watched her shoulders fall and the curve of her mouth, and I cataloged everything she owed to a story that wasn't hers. I had waited long enough to know the look people wore, When they believed they had won, without work, I had watched them turn my labor into their props, my gifts into their marketing, my presence into the frame they would crop when explaining family. I had warned myself privately 100 times with small promises, each one a hinge to something larger. That night, when Valora laughed, I did not reply with a retort. Instead, I moved quietly and efficiently toward a course of action she could not anticipate. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the stakes. I didn't shout or throw accusations across the table. I began to convert what I had done quietly into evidence they could not deny. I had kept receipts, records, and small notes, things people throw away when they don't think small kindnesses will ever demand accounting. For the first time in a long time, I imagine a ledger where my name would sit clearly next to my actions. Own the record, and you own the story, I thought. Own the story, and you stop being someone to be hidden. That night, when I went to bed, I did not sleep in the place where I had always been expected to accept erasure. I sat in the dark and planned, and the plan was cool, precise, and absolute. Looking back now, I know the day I chose that ledger was the day everything shifted. I didn't know then how public and messy the consequences would be, but I recognized the necessity of the risk. I had watched for years, I had waited for the right moment, and now I had warned myself to move. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The night fell heavy, pressing against the windows like a held breath. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, my laptop glowing faintly across the room. Every sound, the creak of the house, the echo of laughter downstairs, felt like an intrusion. I should have left after dinner, but something inside me refused to go. Not yet. The cursor blinked at the top of the Harvard portal, waiting for a decision. My fingers hovered above the keys, trembling but deliberate. I opened the email I had saved for years, the one that named me in quiet code. Donor code 78421, alias AB. For 3 years, I had funded the scholarship that carried my sister's name. For 3 years, I let her build her legacy on my generosity. She had no idea who had given her the life she bragged about now. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred into one long truth. My silence had financed her spotlight. I clicked the link to withdraw my sponsorship. The page loaded with a simple question. Do you wish to terminate your funding immediately? Yes. The confirmation box opened, asking for a reason. My fingers moved on their own. This scholarship was never yours, just your spotlight. I hit send. A soft chime broke the silence. It sounded like a door closing quietly behind me. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. From downstairs came the hum of celebration, the kind of sound only people without guilt can make. Valora's laughter rose above the rest, light and effortless. I picked up my phone and opened her social media. Her new post gleamed at the top of the feed. Hard work pays off. No shortcuts, no handouts, just persistence and grace. Comments flooded in. So proud of you, Valora. You're a real inspiration. She's proof that good girls win. I scrolled through the noise, the lies repeated until they looked like truth. Then I locked my phone and set it face down on the desk. The light from my laptop faded to black. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing, feeling the shape of calm settle where anger used to live. I thought of how easily they believed her version of events. Maybe because she told it first. Maybe because it was prettier. When I walked downstairs, the house glowed with post-celebration comfort. Half-empty glasses, music playing low, the hum of contentment only arrogance could buy. Mom sat by the fire, showing Velora's post to a neighbor. "Isn't she amazing?" Mom said, her voice full of pride. "She's so driven. She's everything her sister never aimed to be." The woman nodded. "She's what every parent dreams of." I froze mid-step. Thurston looked at me from his chair. For a second, I thought he might say something, anything, but he looked away, folding the newspaper he hadn't been reading. Velora caught my eye across the room. Her smile was polite, practiced, the kind she used on strangers she wanted to impress. I could have spoken then, could have told them that their prodigy was built on my quiet labor. But there's no audience for truth when everyone's already comfortable with a lie. I placed my glass on the table and walked past them without a word. In the hallway mirror, my reflection followed me. Same dress, same tired eyes, but something colder. Something done pretending. I closed the door to my room, the noise muffled behind it. My hands felt steady again. I reached for the small velvet pouch in my bag. Inside was the printed contract, signed and dated, proof of the gift that had never been acknowledged. I folded it carefully, the paper soft from years of keeping. Next to it lay my repaired hairpin, the clasp fixed, the gem slightly dulled, but still intact. I placed the two side by side on the desk. For the first time, I didn't feel erased. I felt documented. Downstairs, the laughter continued, but it sounded different now, hollow, like the echo of something breaking beneath the surface. I thought of what would happen in the next few days. The call from the university, the email they'd send to Velora, the slow, crawling realization that her story was about to collapse under the weight of the truth. She built her image on silence. I just turned the volume up. Looking back now, I know that was the night the house began to split, not with shouting, but with the quiet crack of illusion giving way to consequence. I heard it before I felt it, her scream slicing through the silence like a bell cracking down the middle. What the hell? Harvard just emailed me. The scholarship gone. Doors slammed. Footsteps thundered across the floorboards overhead. I didn't move. I stayed in my room, sitting on the edge of the bed, with the velvet pouch still in my hand. I hadn't slept. I didn't plan to. The hallway erupted. Velora's voice breaking through like a fire alarm no one could shut off. She was spiraling, but it wasn't panic I heard. It was entitlement clawing to survive. It took her 3 years to build the lie. It took me one sentence to end it. My phone lit up. Family group chat. 12 new messages. Velora, who did this? What do you mean the donor pulled out? Velora, is this a joke? Because I'm not laughing. Velora, fix it. I don't care who. Just fix it. Evadne's number popped up on my screen. I let it ring. Once. Twice. 10 times. I answered on the 11th. Yes. Her voice shook. Was it you? If it were, I said, shouldn't you be thanking me instead of blaming me? Silence. Heavy, dense. She exhaled but didn't speak. She hung up. 3 minutes later, the knock came. Loud. Rhythmic. Angry. Velora didn't wait for me to answer. She shoved the door open, waving her phone like a blade. You've ruined everything, she shouted. Everything I've worked for. You waited until the most public moment. Why? I didn't flinch. I stayed seated. Calm. You built your house on someone else's land. I said. You just didn't expect the deed to be real. She blinked. You're jealous. You always have been. I was quiet. I said, not jealous. There's a difference. You mistook patience for permission. She stood there, chest rising, unable to find the next insult. She turned and slammed the door on her way out like a child denied dessert. I didn't move. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. The next morning, the donor list on Harvard's website updated. Velora's name vanished. I refreshed the page just once to be sure. Then I closed my laptop and walked into the kitchen. No one looked me in the eye. By noon, a freelance education writer had picked up the change. I recognized her name from an old gala where we'd discussed scholarships for underrepresented students. Her message came through LinkedIn. Aladisa, off the record, did you fund the original sponsorship for Velora B? Just trying to confirm a source. Appreciate your time, either way. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth didn't ask for my permission anymore. Downstairs, Evadne sat by the fireplace, scrolling her phone with a frown she couldn't quite hide. Thurston knocked gently on my door later that day. He looked tired, older, the kind of age that guilt adds. Alaris, he said, whatever happens next, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I didn't respond, not because I couldn't, but because I had nothing left to offer in translation. I reached for the velvet pouch again and folded it tighter in my palm. Not in anger, just as a gesture of closure. Let them scramble. Let them panic. I wasn't cleaning it up this time. The house grew louder by the hour. Arguments, blame, whispered demands, panicked phone calls. And I had never felt more at peace. Looking back now, I realized this wasn't about destroying someone. It was about reclaiming myself from beneath the weight of their performance. They had run the play too long. I had simply pulled the curtain. The house still buzzed with aftermath when I climbed into my car, but I did not answer a single call. Velora's name lit the screen. Evadne's followed. The family group chat bubbled like a pot left on low. I silenced everything, placed my phone face down, and let the engine warm to a calm I hadn't expected. They were frantic for forgiveness faster than they had ever offered an apology. Driving east without a destination felt like the only honest plan. I stopped at a small cafe a few blocks from the office, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window. A news alert pinged, and my chest tightened, not from surprise, but from a strange relief. Influencers' Harvard deal canceled amid silent sponsorship conflict. The headline read in stark type. Comments below the article were brutal and quick, shaping public opinion in hours. I scrolled once, eyes flat, then set the cup down and did not add fuel to the fire. At my desk, the ledger sat like evidence waiting for a verdict. My assistant dropped a file in front of me with that clumsy, practical sympathy people use when delivering inconvenient things. Harvard requested reinstatement under the original benefactor. She said quietly, careful not to make it a celebration. My name, printed and clear, replaced the shadow that had been used as someone else's podium. I signed the papers not for vanity, but because truth requires a record. I called the donor services number and confirmed what the file suggested. The university acknowledged the withdrawal and then, in a separate email, recognized my prior contributions under my alias. It was a small, dry victory, official, bureaucratic, irrefutable. Proof that generosity had history and ownership, proof that I had not been invisible when I chose to give. At lunch, I reread a message my grandmother once sent, the handwriting faint on an old printed email I kept folded in a drawer. Don't let quiet become your prison. Make it your weapon, she had written, in a hand I could still see. I placed that message beside my repaired hairpin on the desk and felt a tether snap somewhere inside me. The velvet pouch was empty now. The record belonged to history, not to secrecy. That evening, Valora left a voice message on my phone, thin, unsteady. "You win, okay? Is that what you wanted?" she said, voice small, fumbling for an emotion I did not owe her. "I am sorry. I guess." I did not reply. I forwarded the message to a locked folder and labeled it unnecessary. The act felt lighter than I expected. They scrambled in headlines and in the living room while I made a schedule for myself. I set appointments that had been postponed for years, called mentors I had admired but never approached, and booked a ferry ticket for a weekend away. Freedom tasted like small plans stitched together, appointments, essays, an art class I'd once abandoned. It was not a loud emancipation. It was the quiet accumulation of things I had left undone for the sake of others. Looking back now, I know the truth did more than topple a polished story. It allowed me to rewrite the narrative I had been living inside for decades. I was not cured of all scars, but I was authorized to be whole again on my own terms. I didn't need their applause or their explanations. I needed the ledger, the record, and the permission to move forward. I carried no fire into the new year, only the quiet weight of what I would not say. That weight became ballast, steadying me through the months that followed. I had rewritten my story, clause by careful clause, and I did it without asking for their permission or their praise. I didn't need closure handed from them. I had built it myself, line by line document, signature by signature. I was free enough to let go and steady enough to stand. The first Saturday of the new year crept in gently, with pale sunlight sliding through the sheer curtains. For once, there were no sounds demanding my attention, no pings from the phone, no names lighting up the screen, just stillness. The air in my apartment carried that faint winter chill that seeps in even when the windows are closed, but it felt clean, like a reset I hadn't realized I needed. I brewed coffee, poured it into my favorite chipped mug, and stood by the window watching the world outside. The street below was almost empty, save for an elderly couple walking their dog and a boy dragging his sled across the thin snow. I smiled without thinking. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like space. There was something extraordinary about silence when it wasn't forced. For years, my quiet had been compliance, a way to keep peace I never benefited from. Now it was choice. I could breathe in it. I could expand inside it. Looking back now, I think freedom is less about distance and more about the absence of noise. After breakfast, I opened the small wooden box I kept on my shelf. Inside were fragments of an old life, receipts, postcards, bits of ribbon, a few photos I never framed. I sifted through them slowly, not in nostalgia, but with curiosity. One picture caught me off guard. My grandmother and me sitting on her porch one summer, both of us wearing the same gemstone hairpin. She had tucked it into my hair that day, whispering, "Quiet girls still shine, just in softer light." I smiled, not in sadness, but in recognition. Her love had never been loud. Neither was mine. The photo went back into the box, and I pulled open my laptop. Dozens of unsent emails waited in the drafts folder. Letters to my family written over years. Some angry, some almost tender. Others were half-written apologies for things I hadn't done. I scrolled through each, remembering how badly I used to want to be understood. Then I selected them all and pressed delete. The computer chimed once, the sound small and final. They don't need to read my grief, to feel its absence, I whispered to the quiet room. By noon, a knock sounded on the door. I hesitated before opening it. The mail carrier smiled, handed me a single envelope, handwritten, the paper thick, deliberate. The return address was one I knew too well, Thurston. Inside was a short note written in his neat accountant handwriting. For once I saw it all. Thank you for not yelling. You made me listen. There was no signature, no closing line, only 2 words below the message. Dad. I sat down on the couch, reading it twice. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness either. But it was acknowledgement, and maybe that was enough. For the first time, his voice felt real. I folded the letter, placed it between the pages of an old journal, and made tea. The kettle whistled softly as I thought about how years of misunderstanding could sometimes end not in confrontation, but in clarity. Later that afternoon, I met my friend Clara at the small tea shop near the library. We spoke about books, art exhibits, and the weather. The conversation was simple, human, weightless. My phone buzzed once on the table, vibrating against the wood. I didn't look. Clara noticed. Don't you want to check? She asked. I smiled. No. If it's important, it'll wait. If it's them, it doesn't matter. She nodded, understanding without asking who them was. We went back to our tea. Outside, the light began to fade into that honey-colored dusk that makes everything look kinder than it is. I watched people pass by, families, couples, a man carrying groceries, and thought about how ordinary peace could look when you'd never had it before. When I returned home, the apartment was still. The repaired hairpin sat on my desk beside my grandmother's note. I picked it up, turning it in my fingers. The gem no longer sparkled as it once had, but that no longer mattered. It didn't need to shine anymore. I did. Looking back now, I realize survival isn't the same as healing. Healing is quieter. It's the gentle work of rebuilding after the fire is out, of walking barefoot across cooled ashes and realizing they no longer burn. That's where my story paused, not ended but exhaled. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it's just the quiet choice to stop shrinking for people who never saw you fully. What about you? Have you ever been the quiet one in the room, holding everything together, only to be erased from the story? If that hit home, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, because some truths deserve to be heard, even if they whisper.